Jordan Price. Pretended to be an employee. Applying for a job. What happened next? Surprised everyone. What would you do if the billionaire CEO of your company walked in disguised as a regular job applicant? No cameras, no entourage, just a plain shirt, a fake name, and a hidden mission. When Jordan Price, one of the tech world's most powerful men, decided to infiltrate his own company, nobody saw it coming. But what he uncovered behind those sleek office doors, it shocked him to his core. From fake smiles to real betrayals, this undercover journey turned into a corporate reckoning no one was prepared for. In the heart of Silicon Valley, Shaq Tech stood tall as a beacon of innovation founded by Big Shaq, a man whose reputation in the tech world was AIM. To a legend, the company had become a symbol of success. The sleek glass towers gleamed in the sunlight, housing the sharpest minds, and technology Big Shaq was not just the CEO, he was a king in his realm with a fortune worth billions and a string of high-profile acquisitions under his belt. Big Shaq had everything most people would dream of, but it was the people under his roof that had begun to trouble him, despite the endless accolades and financial triumphs. Whispers had started to surface about the culture at Shaq Tech. Employees, once eager to work under a billionaire visionary, were now murmuring about HA shift. The promise of work-life balance was met with demands for unreasonable overtime. Respect for subordinates had seemingly vanished as higher-ups became increasingly inaccessible, only showing up to flex their influence when necessary. And there was the dark undercurrent of favoritism. Certain employees got away with blatant incompetence. While others were left to toil in silence as the months passed, Big Shaq began to hear more troubling stories. Stories of office bullying, unethical decision-making, and a disturbing lack of transparency. Despite the growing rumors, no one dared to speak up, fearing the fallout. But Big Shaq knew the truth behind the high-tech facade of his company. Something ugly was taking rot. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Big Shaq had built his empire on principles of hard work, dedication, and integrity. But somewhere along the way, those ideals had become distorted. He could no longer pretend that the company he had poured his heart into was still in line with his values, so he made a decision, one that would change everything. Shaq stood in front of the mirror in his private office late one evening, staring at his reflection. His usual attire of custom-made suits and polished new was now a distant thought. He had already made arrangements, speaking only with his trusted HR director, Monica Wells, about the plan no one else could know. Not even his top executives. They would have to find out the hard way. The plan was simple but daring. He would disguise himself. Shaq, the CEO of Shaq Tech, would go undercover. He would leave behind the power, the fame, and the perks of being the billionaire boss, and step into the shoes of someone no one would notice. A middle-aged IT support specialist named Ethan Brooks. Ethan Brooks would be a regular guy. Shaq had spent weeks researching the role, dressing in plain, dull clothing, reading up on the mundane tasks of its specialists, and practicing how to blend in as a low-ranking employee. He wanted to be invisible. He would test his employees firsthand to see who they really were when they didn't know the CEO was watching. His ultimate goal was to bring the company back to its core values, but he needed to know how deep the rot went. Monica Wells was the only one who knew the truth. She had been with him for years, loyal to the cause. She would help set up his new identity, making sure that he could enter the company undetected. As he adjusted the plain gray polo shirt and khakis that made up his new uniform, Shaq felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. For years, he had been the untouchable figure, always in control, Conter always a step ahead. But now, as Ethan Brooks, he would be just another faceless employee, a man with no power, no influence. The thought was both unsettling and exhilarating. He had been in the boardrooms, giving orders, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Now he would have to listen, follow orders, and observe from the sidelines. He chuckled to himself. It was a bold move, but one that could change everything. The next morning, Shaw, in his new identity, arrived at the Shaq Tech offices early. The glass building stood before him, towering and cold inside. Employees were beginning to trickle in, unaware of the man who walked among them. The bustling noise of the office, the click of keyboards, and the hum of the air conditioning felt strange to Shaq. He wasn't used to being a part of the crowd, to not being the focal point. Ethan Brooks was the name he would answer to. Now he felt the weight of the new identity settled around him like a cloak of invisibility. But with it came an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time in years, Shaq was no longer the CEO. He was just another employee blending in with the crowd. As he walked through the lobby, he noticed a few familiar faces, employees who had once praised him at company events, who now passed him by without a second glance. No one knew who he really was, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Shaq's heart raced as he approached the IT department, where he was assigned his first task. The department was a small room tucked in the back of the building. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the rows of cubicles. Ethan Brooks Shaw's new persona would spend his days fixing computers, troubleshooting issues, and being, for all intents and purposes, completely ordinary. But in this ordinary world, Big Shaq would uncover the truth, and he would stop at nothing to restore the company's integrity, no matter what he discovered along the way. The first few days in the IT department were nothing short of disorienting for Big Shaw. As Ethan Brooks, he was invisible. He was nobody. And that was exactly what he had expected, but the reality of it, of being just another cog in the machine, was striking in its way. Shaq had always been in control in his lavish office at the top floor of the Shaq Tech building. He was used to people listening even when he wasn't speaking his decision. Visions reverberated through the company like ripples in a pond. But now, as Ethan Brooks, he was just another middle-aged IT specialist, someone easily overlooked, someone whose ideas were dismissed before they even had a chance to be voiced the first. Morning. He arrived in the department. The senior employees barely looked up as he walked past. They didn't know who he was, and that's exactly how he wanted it. He was assigned a seat in a dimly lit corner away from the action, next to a row of aging computers that needed constant repairs. The hum of machines, the clicking of keyboards, and the constant murmur of conversations filled the room, but no one really acknowledged him. He had spent his entire career as a leader, someone whose presence commanded respect. But now he was just Ethan Brooks, an invisible cog in a giant corporate machine. It was disheartening, but Shaq pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. This was a test he had to endure. Blend in and observe. He had to see how the employees treated one another when no one was watching, how the culture really worked under the polished surface of Shaq Tech. For the first few hours, Ethan Brooks did little more than fetch forgotten coffee mugs from cubicles, help reset passwords, and troubleshoot minor tech issues. There were no grand projects, no meetings where his expertise could shine. Instead, he was assigned the simplest, most mundane tasks. It was as if the senior IT staff didn't even notice he was there, or worse, they didn't care. Shaq's frustration built with every passing minute. It was hard not to be irritated by the lack of respect at his level. He was accustomed to high-level meetings, late-night strategy calls, and decisions that shaped the future of the tech world now. He was shuffling papers and fixing computer screens that had barely been touched in years. His new colleagues treated him with a strange, distant condescension. It wasn't overt bullying, but the little microaggressions were enough to sting one of the senior developers. Travis Cole barely even acknowledged him when he asked about the network setup. Travis Cole, a smug, middle-aged man with thick glasses, had all but ignored Tyler Nguyen's presence during the entire morning. "Just make sure you don't break anything," Travis Cole muttered without looking up from his screen as Shaq approached his desk for help. On a task, Shaq clenched his jaw. Pushing the anger down, he reminded himself that this was part of the plan. He needed to see if these employees were capable of showing respect, or if they only reserved their politeness for the higher-ups. As the day wore on, it became clear that the IT department was a microcosm of the company. At large, Some employees were hardworking and respectful. While others were rude, dismissive, and self-important, there was no real camaraderie. Everyone was too busy looking out for themselves to bother with anyone else. But then there was Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee was a junior developer in his late 20s, someone who struck Shaq as genuinely kind. Unlike the others, Brandon Lee didn't treat him like an invisible presence. Instead, he offered to help when Shaq had trouble with the office printer. His smile was friendly, his voice warm, and his enthusiasm contagious. He didn't judge Ethan Brooks for being just another it guy. Instead, he treated him like a teammate. "Hey, Ethan Brooks, if you're struggling with that printer, just let me know. I know it's a pain. We've been trying to get the new model set up for weeks," Brandon Lee said, showing him how to troubleshoot an issue Shaq had been unable to figure out on his own. Shaq appreciated the kindness, but even more, he appreciated the sincerity. Brandon Lee wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just a young man who genuinely cared about doing his job well and about helping others do the same. But not everyone was so kind. As the day went on, Shaq found himself observing more disturbing behavior. The senior members of the IT team seemed more focused on their own status than the success of the team. In meetings, they barely acknowledged his presence, offering him nothing but the most basic tasks to complete. And when he did manage to contribute, his ideas were brushed aside. In one meeting, Shaq suggested a simple fix for a recurring problem with the company's internal network work. The room fell silent. No one responded. Then Nicole Barrett, a senior developer, casually repeated Shaw's suggestion as though it were her own. The team nodded in agreement, acting as though they had all come up with the solution. It was a slap in the face, and Shaq felt a surge of frustration. Was this how it always worked? Was this the environment he had unknowingly cultivated in his company? This kind of behavior, disrespect, dishonesty, and lack of integrity was what he had to root out. But first he had to gather evidence. He couldn't make changes without knowing the full extent of the problem. To test his colleagues further, Shaq decided to drop his wallet in the office break room the next morning. It was a simple trick, but it would reveal volumes about the character of the people he worked with the next day. Shaq set his plan in motion. He casually left his wallet on the counter in the break room, tucked just enough out of sight to make it seem accidental. He then waited sitting at his desk watching the surveillance cameras on his phone. At first, no one seemed to notice employees shuffled in and out of the break room, engrossed in their phones or chatting with each other, but then Rachel Kim, the receptionist, walked in. She glanced down at the wallet and immediately picked it up, looking around the room before walking toward the lost, and found Shaq watched as she placed the wallet in the designated drawer with a quiet, respectful nod. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes, but the same could not be said for Kyle Thompson, the supervisor. Kyle Thompson had always been the type to flaunt his power, to walk around like he owned the place. When he noticed the wallet, his eyes lit up for a moment. He grabbed it quickly, slipping the cash out of sight before anyone could see. Shaq watched as Kyle Thompson slipped the wallet into his pocket, then casually returned to his desk as if nothing had happened. It was clear to Shaq that Kyle Thompson was part of the problem. The stage was set. He had seen enough. He was ready to make his move. Shaq had always prided himself on being able to read people. Years of boardroom battles, corporate deals, and high stakes. Negotiations had sharpened his instincts, allowing him to spot weaknesses, strengths, and true intentions with the precision of a skilled hunter. But now, in his guise as Ethan Brooks, he was testing those same instincts in a new way. He wasn't making deals or calling the shots. He was quietly observing, waiting, and hoping the truth would reveal itself. The wallet incident had given him valuable insight, but Shaq knew he needed to dig deeper. He had to know who would rise above the toxic undercurrents of the workplace culture and who would sink further into it. The problem wasn't just a few bad apples, it was a systemic issue, and as the CEO, Shaq had the power to change that, but only if he understood the full scope of the problem. So he decided to set a simple test but one that would expose the true nature of those around him. It began with a small, almost most innocent gesture. The break room was always a bit of a mess. Cups and plates left out, papers scattered around, and crumbs from half-eaten lunches strewn about. Shaq noticed how people would simply ignore it, walking past the mess, as if it were someone else's problem. That, too, was a sign of the deeper cultural rot. A company that couldn't take care of its own small problems would never solve the bigger ones. So the next day, he dropped a piece of paper on the floor near his cubicle. Just a single crumpled receipt from his lunch. It wasn't much, but he watched carefully to see who would take the initiative to pick it up. He wasn't disappointed. Rachel Kim, the receptionist who had returned his wallet the day before, spotted the paper within minutes. She hesitated only for a moment before walking over, bending down, and tossing it into the recycling bin. No fuss, no complaints, just a small, simple act of responsibility. Shaq nodded to himself. It was exactly the kind of integrity he had been hoping to see. Rachel Kim wasn't seeking recognition. She didn't even know that Shaq was watching her. She simply did the right thing, because that was who she was. As the day progressed, Shaq repeated the test in small, subtle ways. He would leave out papers or empty cups in plain sight, watching for anyone who would step forward to do the right thing. Over the next few hours, he saw a variety of reactions. Some employees walked by the messes, eyes fixed ahead as if the mess didn't exist. Others muttered complaints under their breath but continued to ignore it. And then there was Kyle Thompson, the supervisor who had pocketed the money from his wallet. Kyle Thompson passed by the mess and made a show of looking around as if waiting for someone else to take care of it. He barely even registered Shaw's presence as he walked to his desk, leaving the mess behind. It wasn't surprising Kyle Thompson had already shown his true colors. He was the type of person who took what he wanted and never looked back, always hoping someone else would clean up the mess. The true test, however, came when Shaw decided to drop something even more valuable. A personal item. This time in the afternoon, he went into the IT supply room and intentionally left his phone on a counter with the screen facing up. The phone was brand new, a high-end model that Shaq had picked out himself for personal use. He set it down on the counter, as if he had simply forgotten it, then stepped out of the room to wait. He watched through the small window in the door. It didn't take long before a few of the senior employees walked in, talking amongst themselves. Shaq knew that none of them knew the phone was his. He had left it out in a way that made it look like an item someone else had carelessly left behind. As they passed by the phone, they barely spared at a glance. And then Brandon Lee, the junior developer, entered the room. He wasn't like the others. He didn't strut through the office with a sense of entitlement. He walked in, eyes scanning the room, his thoughts obviously elsewhere, but then he saw the phone without hesitation. He picked it up, checked the screen, and looked around the room. Brandon Lee's first instinct was to find its owner, without a second thought. He walked out of the room, scanning the nearby desks for anyone who might be looking for the phone. Shaq knew that Brandon Lee had no idea who owned the phone, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he took the time to do the right thing. As Brandon Lee walked past Shaq's desk on his way to the front of the office, he stopped holding the phone out. "Hey, I think someone left this behind. You know whose phone this is?" Shaq smiled and took the phone, nodding his approval. "Thank you, Brandon Lee. That was the right thing to do." Brandon Lee smiled back, though there was no recognition in his eyes. "No problem, man. Just doing what's right in that moment." Shaq realized something important, something that would shape the way he approached the next steps of his mission. Brandon Lee was a good man. He wasn't interested in climbing the corporate ladder by stepping on others. He didn't look for praise or recognition. He simply wanted to do his job and do it well. Rachel Kim, Brandon Lee, and the janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, had all shown Shaw that there was hope. Hope that not everyone in the company was tainted by the toxic culture, but they were the exceptions, not the. There was one more test he needed to conduct, one final action that would expose the true depths of the problem. In this time, it wouldn't be something as simple as a dropped wallet. The office buzzed with the hum of productivity. At least that's what Shaq had observed from his seat as Ethan Brooks from behind the facade of cubicles. The walls seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, but beneath the surface the atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind of tension that wasn't visible in spreadsheets or meetings, but instead manifested in the small, seemingly insignificant moments that created a toxic undercurrent. It was here in these quiet corners of Shaw Tech that the real problems lay. Shaq had been observing his colleagues for weeks now, patiently watching how they interacted with one another, how they treated those beneath their status in the corporate hierarchy. He had already learned a lot about the culture at Shaq Tech, how some employees took advantage of their positions, how others lacked, the integrity Shaq valued so deeply, and how a few had simply fallen victim to the pervasive negativity that had infected the workplace. But one thing still nagged at him. One issue that stood out like a sore thumb. The bullying. It wasn't the overt, harsh kind that made headlines. No, the bullying at Shaq Tech was insidious, subtle, and it seeped into every aspect of the office. Shaq had seen it in the way senior employees dismissed their junior colleagues in the snide comments exchanged behind closed doors. And in the whispers that filled the halls when a colleague wasn't present, he had witnessed the condescending tone used by team leads when speaking to anyone beneath them. The idea that talented, hard-working people were being treated like less than human made Shaq's blood boil. The worst of it, however, was what he saw happening to him as Ethan Brooks. Shaq had assumed a position as the office punching bag. No one actively targeted him, but there were moments, often subtle ones, that made him feel invisible, weak, and utterly expendable. It wasn't just the way his ideas were dismissed or the way his efforts were ignored. No, the bullying at Shaq Tech came in more forms than that. It came in the form of being completely disregarded, passed over, and worst of all, patronized. Shaq couldn't help but notice the way people made jokes about him behind his back. The team lead Erica Dawson would occasionally make cruel remarks about old guys like Ethan Brooks who just couldn't keep up with the technology. It wasn't an isolated comment. The frequency of these types of remarks made it clear for some Shaq wasn't just invisible, he was a joke on one particularly grueling afternoon. Shaq sat at his desk attempting to troubleshoot a network error when a conversation broke out near the kitchen. Erica Dawson, one of the senior team leads, was speaking to Travis Cole, a senior developer who, like her, seemed to enjoy making others feel inferior. "Did you see Ethan Brooks try to reboot that router this morning?" Erica Dawson said with a laugh, her voice carrying across the room. "It was like watching a kid trying to figure out how to play a video game. I swear some of these old-timers need to just retire already." CG snickered. "Tell me about it. But hey, at least he's not in charge of anything important, right? Just keep him fixing the computers and resetting passwords. That's the only thing he's good for." The laughter that followed stung, but Shaq kept his head down, focusing on the task at hand. It wasn't the first time he'd overheard such remarks, but today it felt different. Today, Shaq saw the truth in their words, in their eyes. He was just an old man with no place in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of tech. He was just another expendable employee, a relic of a bygone era. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how the bullying had become normalized. The employees who were supposed to be leaders were the ones making the cruelest comments, and no one said a word to stop it. The culture of disrespect had grown so ingrained in Shaq Tech that it seemed like no one even noticed it anymore that evening. As Shaq made his way to the office kitchen to grab a quick snack, he saw it again. This time, the bullying was aimed at someone who hadn't been able to defend themselves. It was Ethan Brooks, a quiet and introverted junior employee who worked in the development team. He was always polite, always eager to learn, but he wasn't the most outspoken of workers. Ethan Brooks had a tendency to be a little slow in his tasks, but he tried his best. Shaq admired his determination, and he'd made an effort to offer him encouragement when he could. However, it seemed that others didn't share that sentiment. Ethan Brooks was standing in the kitchen visibly nervous as Erica Dawson and Travis Cole approached him. They were talking loudly, their words dripping with sarcasm. So Ethan Brooks, Erica Dawson, began her tone laced with mockery. "How's that project coming along still stuck on the same old bugs? I bet maybe it's time to admit you're not cut out for this job, huh, Travis?" Cole laughed heartily, his voice echoing through the empty kitchen. "Yeah, Erica Dawson's right. Maybe it's time you found something a little less complicated, like, I don't know, cleaning up around here. You'd be better off with a broom than a keyboard." Shaq felt his fists clench at his sides. He wanted to step forward to intervene, but he knew better. He couldn't reveal himself, not yet at least. But watching Ethan Brooks shrink under, their words made his heart ache. The bullying wasn't just a matter of harsh words, it was a pattern. A systemic issue. People were being crushed under the weight of the office's culture, and no one was doing anything to stop it. Tyler Nguyen's eyes dropped to the floor and he mumbled an apology. He looked so small, so defeated, Shaq wanted to rush to his side to tell him that it wasn't his fault, but he remained silent. The anger building inside him, he couldn't allow this to continue, not in his company. This was a cancer that needed to be cut out, and it needed to be done quickly. Shaq returned to his desk that evening, more determined than ever. He knew that he couldn't change the C culture of Shaw Tech by sitting back and observing. He needed to take action. He needed to show his employees that behavior like this would not be tolerated. Not now. Not ever. The next day, Shaq made his plan. He would expose the bullying, the disrespect, and the systemic issues plaguing his company. He would confront Erica, Dawson, Travis Cole, and anyone else who was contributing to the toxic environment. It was time for change, and it had to start with him. The days after witnessing the bullying at Shaq Tech felt like a slow, burning fuse. The tension in the office had become palpable, a quiet storm brewing under the surface of normally Shaw and his guys, as Ethan Brooks had seen the toxic behaviors that were allowed to flourish, unchecked favoritism, apathy, and an alarming disregard for integrity. It was becoming clear to him that the issues ran deeper than he had initially thought he had to act. But how big Shaq had built Shaq Tech on the principles of innovation, hard work, and respect. But somewhere along the way, those ideals had been buried under layers of bureaucracy, entitlement, and greed. Now he stood at the crossroads of change. He couldn't wait for the right moment anymore. He needed to expose the truth to break the culture wide open and show the employees of Shaq Tech what their actions truly meant it was. Time for the ultimate test. A test that would not only reveal who had integrity, but who would rise to the challenge of doing what was right even when no one was watching. The first step was simple. He had to catch them in the ACT. Shaq knew the game well. People were good at hiding their true intentions behind masks of professionalism, but it was the small, seemingly insignificant moments, the ones that no one paid attention to, that told the real story. So Shaq decided to create a scenario that would expose the weaknesses of his employees and reveal their character. He began with a software glitch that had been causing issues for weeks. The glitch wasn't a critical problem, but it had been affecting productivity for some of the departments, causing delays and frustration. Most employees had learned to ignore it or work around it. But Shaq knew that a problem left unchecked would only grow worse. So he presented a solution, a simple fix that he believed would resolve the issue. When Shaq suggested the fix during a meeting, he was met with silence. His suggestion wasn't dismissed outright, but it was clear that no one was particularly interested. The senior team lead, who had been openly dismissive of him before, brushed it off as something that could be dealt with later. Travis Cole, the senior developer, glanced at his phone, clearly more focused on his personal matters than on the issue at hand. But then Nicole Barrett, one of the senior developers, chimed in with a suggestion of her own, one that in Shaq's opinion was just a more complicated version of his own. She presented it with confidence as if it were a brilliant new idea that no one had thought of before Shaq bit his tongue. He knew what was happening. Nicole Barrett was simply stealing his idea and presenting it as her own. It was a small thing, but it cut deep. Shaq had seen this kind of behavior before. People who took credit for the work of others in an effort to climb the corporate ladder. He couldn't let this slide. He couldn't allow the culture of dishonesty to continue unchecked. The next day, Shaq decided to test his colleagues in a different way. He set up an innocuous task moving heavy equipment from one end of the building to the other. The task was simple enough, but it required coordination and teamwork. Shaq needed to see who would step up to help and who would try to avoid the responsibility. The task was announced at the beginning of the day, and employees were given the option to volunteer. Shaq didn't want to force anyone into it. He simply wanted to observe their reactions as the day went on. He saw a disturbing pattern. Kyle Thompson, the supervisor who had pocketed the money from Shaq's dropped wallet weeks earlier, was the first to avoid void. The task, he didn't even acknowledge it when it was mentioned in the morning meeting. Instead, he disappeared into his office and sent an email to his assistant asking her to handle it. It was a classic case of passing the buck he wasn't interested in, getting his hands dirty even for something as simple as moving equipment. Nicole Barrett, who had stolen Shaq's idea, was just as evasive. She claimed she had prior commitments and important meetings to attend. Shaq had no doubt that these were just excuses, but he allowed her to slip through the cracks. After all, it was her actions that would speak the loudest later. But then there were the others, the employees who truly impressed him. Brandon Lee, the young junior developer who had always been kind to Shaq, immediately offered to help. "I'll give you a hand, Ethan," Brooksy said with a smile, grabbing a dolly and beginning to move the equipment without hesitation. He wasn't looking for praise or recognition. He was simply doing what needed to be done. Rachel Kim, the reception who had returned Shaw's wallet earlier, was equally eager to help. "It's the least I can do," she said as she joined Brandon Lee, lifting one end of a particularly heavy box. "I've got the muscles for it, I guess." And then there was Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, who had quietly observed Shaq's treatment by others with a quiet, dignified resolve. He didn't make a scene, but when he saw Shaq struggling with the equipment, he stepped in without hesitation. "Let me give you a hand, Ethan," Brooksy said with a nod. "I've got some extra time." Shaq watched as these three employees worked together seamlessly without complaining or looking for an excuse to avoid the task. It wasn't just the work they were doing that impressed him, it was the attitude they brought to it. They didn't care about titles or status. They cared about helping one another. As the day came to a close, Shaq reflected on what he had witnessed. The employees who had refused to help, like Kyle Thompson and Nicole Barrett, were a reflection of the toxic culture that had taken root at Shaq Tech. They weren't interested in doing what was right unless it directly benefited them. They were driven by ambition and self-interest, with little regard for the well-being of others. But Brandon Lee, Rachel Kim, and Mr. Rodriguez, they were the ones who had passed the test. They were the ones who had shown integrity, work ethic, and a willingness to help others regardless of their status. These were the employees Shaq wanted to cultivate. These were the people who would lead Shaq Tech into the future. Shaw knew that the time had come to take action. He couldn't let the toxic behaviors continue any longer. It was time to expose the corruption and favoritism that had become so ingrained in the EI company culture. The next step was clear. He would confront those who had failed the test, and he would reward those who had risen above it. But before he could do that, there was one final test to conduct, a test that would push the limits of ethics and integrity. This time, it would be a public reckoning. The anticipation in the air was thick, suffocating. Even Shaq had spent weeks working as Ethan Brooks, observing the employees of Shaq Tech, silently noting their every action he had witnessed, both the best and the worst in his company. And it was clear the culture of dishonesty, greed, and disrespect was far deeper than he had initially realized. The employees he had seen display integrity, like Rachel Kim, Brandon Lee, and Mr. Rodriguez, were the exceptions. Not the rule. The time had come for him to make a dramatic move, one that would force the company to confront the issues that had been festering for so long. It was early Friday morning when Shaq called for the company-wide meeting he had arranged. For all the employees to gather in the main conference room under the guise of a routine update, only Monica Wells, the HR director, knew what was about to happen. She had helped him arrange the event, keeping the truth hidden from the rest of the staff. Everyone believed that Ethan Brooks Shaw's undercover persona was still just another faceless IT guy. But today, everything was about to change. The meeting room was spacious with sleek glass walls and a long, polished wooden table at the center. The senior executives were seated at the front, while the rest of the employees filled the chairs in the back. Back, the hum of nervous chatter filled the room as everyone waited for the meeting to begin. Shaq, still in his disguise as Ethan Brooks, stood at the back of the room, blending into the crowd. He observed the employees as they settled into their seats. Many were focused on their phones. Others were engaged in hushed conversations. No one paid him any special attention. Monica Wells, who had been acting as the interim HR director in Shaw's absence, stepped up to the podium to introduce the meeting. Her voice was calm, but there was a subtle tension behind her words. "Good morning, everyone." Monica Wells began, her eyes scanning the room. "Today we're here for an important company-wide update. As many of you know, we've been working on improving our internal processes and addressing some concerns that have been raised about our company culture. This meeting will address some of those concerns." Shay could see the puzzled expressions on the faces of the employees. They didn't know what to expect, but they all knew that something was different about this meeting. The tension in the room was palpable, and it was exactly what Shaq had hoped for. Monica Wells continued, "We've been doing some work behind the scenes to better understand our company dynamics, and as part of that process, we've conducted an internal audit of some of our recent operations. Today, we'll be presenting the findings of that." Audit Shaq watched as a few of the senior executives shifted nervously in their seats. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that they were about to be exposed. With a nod from Monica Wells, the lights in the room dimmed and a large screen at the front of the room flickered to life. Shaq had prepared a video that would reveal the ugly truth behind Shaq Tech's toxic workplace culture. It wasn't just the financial discrepancies he had uncovered, it was the systemic issues of disrespect, favoritism, and dishonesty that had been plaguing the company for years. The video began with footage of the break room, showing employees ignoring a simple mess that had been left on the floor. It showed Erica Dawson and Travis Cole laughing at Tyler Nguyen's expense, mocking him for his age and his slow typing skills. It showed the moments when employees took credit for each other's work, when they avoided helping one another, when they treated their colleagues as nothing more than stepping stones. The weight of the moment. The employees were watching themselves, their actions, their words, their lack of accountability played out in front of them. No one could hide from the truth when the video ended. The lights came back on and Shaq stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. He had already removed his disguise earlier that morning. No longer Ethan Brooks, the ordinary it guy. Shaq was back in his sharp suit, standing tall at the podium as the CEO of Shaw Tech. The room was frozen in shock. Employees stared at him wide-eyed, their mouths agape. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. "I am Big Shaw," he said calmly, his voice carrying through the room, "the CEO of Shaw Tech, and for the past few weeks, I have been working right alongside you, observing, listening, and watching. You've all been part of a test to see who you really are, who you truly are when you think no one is watching." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "What you saw in that video is not just a few bad apples." Shaq continued, "It's a reflection session of the toxic culture that has been allowed to fester in this company. This is not what Shack Tech was built on. We were founded on respect, integrity, and innovation. But somewhere along the way, we lost our way." Shack's voice grew more passionate. "We cannot continue to operate like this. We cannot allow greed, apathy, and disrespect to define us. We need to change, and we will. But that change starts today." He turned to face the senior executives. "The behavior you saw in that video will not be tolerated. Kyle Thompson, Travis Cole, Erica Dawson. Your actions are unacceptable, and as of today, you are no longer part of this company. You are being let go effective immediately. I will not allow this kind of behavior to poison Shaq Tech any longer." The executives exchanged shocked glances, but Shaw's decision was final. Kyle Thompson, Travis Cole, and Erica Dawson were escorted out of the room without a word. The employees watched in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. Then Shaq turned to the employees who had shown him true integrity. Rachel Kim Brandon Lee and Mr. Rodriguez. Rachel. "Kim Brandon Lee, Mr. Rodriguez," he said with a smile. "You have shown what it means to have true character. You will be rewarded for your dedication and integrity. Brandon Lee, you're promoted to team lead. Rachel Kim, you will take on an executive assistant role with a significant pay raise. Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter will receive a full scholarship for her college education." The employees broke into applause, but Shaq could see that the real work was only just beginning. "I'm not just changing the leadership here," Shaq said, his eyes sweeping the room. "I'm changing the culture from this moment on. We will operate with merit, respect, and integrity. There will be no more favoritism, no more bullying. Everyone will be held accountable for their actions, and if you can't be a part of that, then you will no longer have a place here." As the meeting concluded, Shaq felt a sense of satisfaction the change had begun. And it was only a matter of time before the company transformed into the place it was meant to be. A company built on integrity, where hard work and respect defined the culture. But as Shaq left the room, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The true test was yet to come. He had to make sure the change is stuck, that the new culture took root. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to feel pride in what he had accomplished. Shaq Tech was on the path to becoming something better, something stronger, something worthy of its founder's vision. The dust had barely settled in the conference room when Shaq walked out, his footsteps echoing down the sleek hallway of Shaq Tech's headquarters. He could still feel the weight of the moment. The stares of his employees burned into his memory. For a brief second, he allowed himself to feel the gravity of his actions. He had just made the ultimate decision that would change the course of his company forever, but it was only the beginning. The shock was still reverberating in the air, but Shaq knew there was no turning back. He had exposed the truth. He had shown the employees the flaws in their culture and their behavior. Now he had to ensure that the consequences of their actions would match the gravity of their misdeeds, while rewarding those who had proven their worth through integrity, work ethic, and loyalty. As the door to the conference room closed behind him, Shaq walked into his office and sat at his desk. Taking a deep breath, he didn't want to waste any time. The next phase of the plan had already been set in motion. He had prepared a list of decisions that needed to be made. Those who had abused their positions of power had to face the consequences, and those who had shown character needed to be rewarded for their dedication and integrity. The first step was to make it clear to the entire company that things had changed. He wasn't just sending a message to the executives who had been fired. He was sending it to everyone who worked at Shaq Tech. No one was above the core values that had made the company great. No one was exempt from the consequences of their actions. Monica Wells knocked on his door and entered, holding a folder of paperwork in her hands. Shaq looked up at her, his gaze steady. "It's done," she said, her voice calm but with an underlying excitement. "Kyle Thompson, Travis Cole, and Erica Dawson have been escorted off the premises, their access revoked. Their severance packages are already being processed." Shaq nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Good, but we can't let this be the end of it. We need to show the employees that this isn't just about getting rid of the bad apples. It's about making sure we build something stronger moving forward." Monica Wells nodded in agreement. "What do you have in mind?" Shaq leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "We need to make sure that those who showed integrity are rewarded and rewarded generously. We can't just say we value hard work and honesty. We have to prove it." Shaq's eyes flicked over to the list of names on his desk. Rachel Kim, Brandon Lee, and Mr. Rodriguez were at the top of the list, and he was determined to ensure they received the recognition they deserved. These were the employees who had shown him through their actions what Shaq Tech was capable of when it worked together as a team. They had done the right thing when no one was watching, and they needed to be rewarded in a way that made a lasting impression. Shaq began with Brandon Lee. The young developer had proven himself in ways that others simply hadn't. While most of the senior employees had been too focused on their own careers to offer assistance to others, Brandon Lee had stepped up without hesitation. He had shown genuine care and dedication, not only to his work, but to the well-being of his colleagues. Shaq called Brandon Lee into his office that afternoon. The young developer entered with a nervous smile, unsure of what to expect when Shaq gestured for him to sit. Brandon Lee did so, his eyes darting around the room. Brandon Lee, I want to start by saying how impressed I am with your character, Shaq began. You've shown more integrity in the past few weeks than most of the senior leadership here combined. You've demonstrated leadership qualities, and you've been a real team player. Brandon Lee's eyes widened, clearly not expecting the praise. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of how to respond. I've been watching. Yusha continued, leaning forward slightly. I've seen how you interact with your peers, you help others. You don't hesitate to step in when things get tough, and you're not afraid to speak up, even when your ideas are dismissed. That kind of dedication is rare. Brandon Lee seemed to blush at the recognition, but his humility was evident. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Shaq. I don't expect anything in return. Shaq smiled warmly. You don't need to expect anything. I'm rewarding you because you've earned it. Effective. Immediately, you're being promoted to team lead. You've shown the kind of leadership that this company needs. I want you to take charge of the new projects coming down the line, and I know you'll excel at it. Brandon Lee was visibly taken aback. Thank you, Mr. Shaq. I won't let you down. Shaq nodded. I know you won't now go and show the rest of the company how it's done. As Brandon Lee left the office, Shaq couldn't help but feel a sense of pride he had made the right choice in promoting Brandon. Lee and he was confident that the young developer would continue to lead with integrity and passion. Next, Shaq turned to Rachel Kim. She had been with the company for years, and she had shown time and again that she had the right attitude. Rachel Kim wasn't just a great receptionist. She was the kind of employee who made others feel welcomed, who kept the office running smoothly, and who consistently went above and beyond to ensure the company's success. Shaq wanted to reward her not just for her work ethic, but for her character. When Rachel Kim walked into his office, Shaq stood to greet her. His hand extended. Rachel Kim, I've been watching you for some time now. He said you've been an exemplary employee. Not just in terms of your work, but in the way you've treated your colleagues. You've shown kindness and respect in a place that's lacked it, and I appreciate that more than you know. Rachel Kim looked at him, clearly surprised. I just do what I can to help. Shaq smiled. That's exactly why I'm promoting you to executive assistant with a substantial pay raise. You've earned it. I want you to be a part of the leadership team now. Your dedication and loyalty to the company have not gone unnoticed. Tears welled up in Rachel Kim's eyes as she shook Shaq's hand. Thank you, Mr. Shaq. I won't let you down. Finally, there was Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, who had quietly observed the office culture and taken it upon himself to help Shaq in small yet meaningful ways. He had left snacks at Shaw's desk when no one else would. He had stood up for what was right, even when it seemed like no one cared, and he had treated everyone in the office with the same level of respect. Mr. Rodriguez didn't expect recognition. But Shaq knew that someone who quietly contributed to the greater good deserved to be rewarded. Shaw called Mr. Rodriguez into his office and looked him in the eye. Mr. Rodriguez, you've done more for this company than anyone realizes. You've treated every employee with kindness, and you've stood up for what's right, even when no one else did. For that, I'm offering your daughter a full scholarship to college. She deserves the best, and you've earned it. Mr. Rodriguez's voice cracked as he tried to find words. I don't know what to say. Mr. Shaq, thank you so much. Shaq smiled. You don't need to say anything, you've already done more than enough. The changes that Shaq had set in motion were beginning to take shape. But the real work was only just beginning. Shaq Tech had been shaken to its core. The employees who had clung to their positions of power and privilege had been removed, but there was still much to be done to rebuild the company's culture. Shaq knew that simply firing a few bad apples wouldn't be enough to create lasting change. He needed to implement a comprehensive plan, one that would shift the culture of Shaq Tech from one of greed and apathy to one rooted in respect, collaboration, and integrity. The first order of business was to overhaul the company's promotion system. Shaq had already seen how favoritism and nepotism had poisoned the environment at Shaq Tech. Employees had been promoted based on who they knew, not what they could do. People were rewarded for playing the game, not for showing real talent and dedication. That had to change. Shaq called for a meeting with the remaining leadership team, those who had shown promise and integrity in the wake of the purge. He needed their input to ensure the new policies would be effective and fair. The room was filled with tension. But it was a good kind of tension, a sense of anticipation for the changes that were about to take place. I've seen firsthand how our company's promotion system has been failing. Shaq began, his voice calm, but firm. We cannot continue rewarding people for playing favorites or for being the loudest voice in the room. We need to create a system that rewards merit, true merit. We need to promote those who work hard, who show leadership, and who consistently demonstrate the values that Shaq Tech was. Founded on. Brandon Lee, now promoted to team leader, nodded in agreement. It's about time we focus on results rather than politics, he said. His voice confident. People who put in the effort and consistently deliver should be the ones getting promoted, not the ones who know how to play the game. Shaq smiled, proud of how Brandon Lee had grown into his new role. Exactly, from this point forward, promotions will be based solely on performance, dedication, and result. No more politics, no more favoritism, only merit. We'll be implementing a system that evaluates employees based on their contributions and their leadership skills. We'll be transparent about the criteria, and we'll make sure that everyone has the same opportunity to succeed. Rachel Kim. Now, Shaq's executive assistant spoke up. And what about the people who have been here for a while, but haven't had the chance to show their potential? Are we going to offer them opportunities to grow? Shaq nodded. Yes, we'll implement training and development. Programs for everyone, regardless of their current position. No one should feel stuck. Everyone should have the chance to learn, grow, and move up if they prove they have the skills and the dedication to do so. Mr. Rodriguez, who had quietly observed the conversation, added his voice. I think it's important to create a culture where we all support each other. If we're going to reward merit, we need to make sure we're also encouraging collaboration. No one should feel like they're on their own. Shaq agreed. Absolutely. We'll be promoting a culture of collaboration over competition. We need to create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing ideas, helping one another, and working as a team. This isn't just about individual success, it's about collective success. The team spent the next few hours discussing the specifics of the new promotion system, the training programs, and how to best implement the cultural shift. Shaq Tech was going to be a place where employees were respected for their hard work, not their connections. It was going to be a place where merit and integrity were the cornerstones of success. But even with the changes to the promotion system, Shaq knew that the real heart of the transformation lay in changing the company's values. He needed to shift the mindset of every employee at Shaq Tech, from the top executives to the newest hires. He needed to make sure that everyone understood what was expected of them, and that those who failed to meet the company's standards would face the consequences. That's where the new ethics training program came in. Shaq had already planned to implement an intensive ethics and leadership training program for all employees, starting with the senior management team. He believed that a company's culture was shaped by its leaders, and if they were not aligned with the values he wanted to instill, then the entire company would struggle. Monica Wells had been working with HR to develop VELOP, a comprehensive training program that would cover topics such as workplace respect, accountability, ethics, leadership, and collaboration. It would be mandatory for every employee, and Shaq wanted to make sure that the training wasn't just a checkbox to tick off. It had to be impactful. Employees needed to understand that this wasn't just about policies. It was about changing the way they thought about their work and their relationships with one another. The first session of the training program was set for the following week, and Shaq was determined to be present. He wasn't just going to sit in the background while the changes took place. He was going to be a part of the process, leading by example. He had to be there to show the employees that he was fully committed to the transformation he was demanding of them. When the day of the first session arrived, Shaq stood in front of the group, his posture confident, his expression determined. The room was filled with nervous energy. Employees weren't sure what to expect, but they knew this was something important. "I know many of you have questions," Shaq began. "You're probably wondering why we're making these changes. You're wondering if this is just another corporate policy that will get lost in the shuffle. But I'm here to tell you that this is different. This is about our future. This is about who we are as a company. And if we're going to succeed, we have to change the way we think about success." Shaq paused, letting his words sink in. "We're not just going to reward people for being good at their jobs. We're going to reward the people who lift others up, who work as a team, who act with integrity. If you're not willing to do that, then this is not the place for you." He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "The culture we had here was toxic. It wasn't just about the bad apples. It was about how we let that behavior slide. But I'm not going to let that happen anymore. From this point on, we will hold each other accountable, and we will all be better for it." Shaq could see the impact his words had on the room. There was no turning back now. He had set the wheels in motion, and the transformation was happening. It wouldn't happen overnight, but the foundation had been laid. Shaq Tech was on the path to becoming the company. It had always been meant to be a place where hard work, integrity, and respect were not just ideals, but the very fabric of the company's culture. The ripple of effects of the changes Shaw had implemented began to take hold almost immediately. The company culture was shifting, albeit slowly, and Shawtech's employees were starting to understand the profound transformation they were experiencing. It wasn't just about policies, promotions, or ethics training. It was about redefining the essence of the company itself. It was about fostering a culture of respect, collaboration, and most importantly, integrity. But the road was not without its challenges in the weeks that followed. The company-wide meeting. There were moments of tension, old habits die hard, and many employees struggled to adjust to the new norms for years. They had operated in an environment where the loudest voices were rewarded, where favoritism ran unchecked, and where doing the right thing often took a backseat to self-interest. But now, under Shaq's leadership, they were being asked to change the way they thought about success. And success no longer meant cutting corners or playing the game. It meant real effort. It meant earning your play by doing the right thing, by lifting others up, and by being a part of a team that valued hard work over shortcuts. Shaq noticed the shift most acutely in the behavior of his senior leadership team. The executives who had been with the company for years, the ones who had once taken their positions for granted, now found themselves facing the uncomfortable truth they had to lead by example. There was no room for arrogance anymore, no room for treating lower-level employees as invisible. Leadership meant showing respect to every individual in the company, no matter their position or tenure. Kyle Thompson's departure had been swift and dramatic, but Shaw's commitment to fairness was unwavering. He made sure that every single employee felt the weight of the changes. Those who were found lacking in integrity or who had resisted the transformation were let go without hesitation. It wasn't personal. It was about creating a better future for the company. The people who refused to embrace the new values were the ones who had to go. But those who had shown true dedication to change were rewarded handsomely. Rachel Kim Brandon Lee and Mr. Rodriguez. Each of them now had a new role, a new purpose within the company. But it wasn't just the people at the top who were benefiting from the reforms. Shaq had made sure that every employee, from the most senior to the most junior, had access to new opportunities for growth. The training programs that Shaq had introduced were gaining tracks. Employees who once felt stagnant in their roles were now participating in mentorship programs, skill-building workshops, and leadership seminars. The idea was simple: everyone had potential. The company's responsibility was to help employees realize that potential and give them the tools to succeed. But despite the positive momentum, Shaq knew that change wasn't a one-time event. It was an ongoing process. It would take time for everyone to fully embrace the new culture. There would be resistance. There would be setbacks. And there would be moments when it seemed like the progress they had made was slipping away. That was the nature of any major transformation Shaq was under. No illusion about this, the company still had work to do one afternoon about 2 months after the reforms were put in place. Shaq sat in his office looking over the latest feedback from the employee surveys. He had always prided himself on keeping a finger on the pulse of the company, and the surveys were one of the ways he could gauge the changes they had made. The results were mixed. While a majority of employees seemed to appreciate the new culture, some were still unsure. The old ways had been deeply ingrained, and a few employees hadn't yet adapted to the new standards. Shaq knew he had to address these concerns, or head on he scheduled a company-wide meeting, one that was different from the dramatic reveal that had taken place months earlier. This time, Shaq was not just an observer or an enforcer of change. He was a leader speaking to his team about the future of Shaq. The meeting was held in the same conference room where he had revealed his identity as Big Shaq, and as employees gathered in their seats, there was a sense of quiet anticipation in the air. Many of them had noticed the subtle changes, the more positive interactions, the stronger focus on teamwork, the growing sense of accountability. But some of them still felt uncertain. Shaq stood at the front of the room, surveying the employees who filled the seats before him. There was no dramatic reveal this time. No hidden cameras or surprises, just him, his team, and the truth. "I've been getting a lot of feedback lately." Shaq began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Some of it has been positive. We've made real strides toward creating a better, more collaborative environment here at Shaq. But some of it has been uncertain. Some of you are still struggling with the changes. And I get that change is hard. It's uncomfortable. It takes time." Shaq paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. He could see the employees nodding, some of them, looking down at the floor, others looking him in the eye. They knew the truth. "We've come a long way." Shaq continued, "But we're not done yet. We're still building. We're still learning. And I want to make sure that every one of you understands what it means to be a part of Shaq. Now it means respect. It means hard work. It means being accountable for what you do and for how you treat the people around you." He walks slowly across the room, his eyes sweeping over the a company that values merit, collaboration, and above all, integrity. Shaq let the words settle in. "I'm proud of the progress we've made, but the real measure of our success will come in the long term in how we hold ourselves to the values we've set and how we support each other moving forward. We're not just changing the company's policy, we're changing our mindset, and that change starts with each of you." The room was quiet for a moment, the weight of Shaq's words hanging in the air. "We've learned a lot over the past few months," Shaq continued, "but the most important lesson is this change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, commitment, and consistency. We're in this together, and I'm committed to making sure that we all succeed as a team." Shaq took a deep breath, then smiled. "And I have to tell you, I'm more confident than ever that Shaq is headed in the right direction." The meeting ended with a sense of quiet optimism. Employees exchanged nods, and left the room with a renewed sense of purpose. Shaw knew that the company wasn't perfect yet, but the seeds had been planted, and as the weeks turned into months, he was confident that the transformation would be lasting. Shaq was no longer a place where selfishness and greed ruled. It was a company that valued integrity and respect, above all else, and that Shaw believed was the key to building something truly great. The transformation of Shaq was far from over, but Big Shaq stood at the summit of something monumental. As the weeks passed, he watched with quiet pride as his company's culture began to reflect the values he had fought so hard to instill. The walls that once separated employees based on their rank began to crumble. There was a newfound sense of camaraderie, a shared understanding that success wasn't about personal gain. It was about collective growth. It wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about treating each other with dignity and respect, no matter who you were or what role you played. Shaq leaned back in his office chair, the sun setting outside the tall glass windows of Shaq headquarters. His thoughts wandered back to the days when things felt so different. The whispers of office politics, the backstabbing, the unfair promotions, it all seemed like another world. Now a world he was determined to leave behind, a world that no longer had a place in his company. Shaq had become a place of opportunity, fairness, and most importantly, integrity. He had given the company a second chance, and it had risen to meet the challenge, but it hadn't been easy. Shaq had faced moments of doubt, moments when he questioned whether the change were happening fast enough. The road had been long filled with obstacles and setbacks, and there were days when he wasn't sure if the company would ever be able to fully heal from the wounds of its past. But now, as he looked around at the thriving, cohesive organization he had helped build, Shaq knew it had all been worth it. He had seen the employees who had once been overlooked or disrespected, people like Brandon Lee, Rachel Kim, and Mr. Rodriguez, rise to new heights, leading teams, making decisions, and setting an example for others to follow. They had proven that integrity and hard work could change the trajectory of a person's career, and Shaq was thriving. Because of it, the company was no longer just a place to work. It was a place to grow, a place where people could find their purpose, learn from each other, and support one another. But as proud as he was of the progress they had made, Shaq knew that his true legacy would not be measured in profits or promotions. It would be measured in the lives he had touched, the people he had helped, and the lasting impact he had made on the culture of Shaq. It would be measured in the ripple effect that reached beyond the walls of the company into the communities they served, the families they supported, and the future leaders who would one day follow in their footsteps. Shaw's thoughts shifted to the bigger picture. He had always known that his success at Shaq wasn't just about building a profitable business. It was about creating a space where people could thrive, not just as employees, but as individuals. He had worked tirelessly to create an environment that nurtured personal and professional growth. But now, with the company stronger than ever, he knew it was time to think beyond the confines of the office. It was time for Shaq to lead by example in the broader world. Shaq picked up his phone and dialed a number he had come to respect over the years. Monica Wells, the HR director who had helped him steer the ship through stormy waters. She answered on the first ring. "Monica Wells," Shaq said, his voice calm but resolute. "I want to do something bigger. We've made incredible strides here, but we can't stop now. Shaq has the power to influence not just the tech industry, but the world at large. We need to make a commitment to giving back to building communities, supporting education, and helping those who don't have the opportunities we take for granted." Monica Wells was quiet for a moment, as if considering the way of his words. "What are you thinking?" "I want us to launch a foundation," Shaq said, "a foundation that focuses on mentorship scholarships and providing resources for underserved communities. We'll partner with local schools, support initiatives that help young people in need, and create a pathway for them to succeed, just like we've done here at Shaq. There was a pause before Monica Wells spoke again, her voice filled with excitement. "I think that's an incredible idea." Shaq, I'm with you. Shaq smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. This was the next step Shaq Tech had changed internally, but now it was time to take those lessons and spread them outward by investing in the future of others, by sharing the lessons he had learned about leadership integrity and respect. Shaq would leave behind a legacy that would extend far beyond the confines of his company as the months passed. Shaq Tech's new initiative, Shaq Tech Cares, began to take shape. The company launched mentorship programs in schools, partnered with universities to offer scholarships to talented students from underprivileged backgrounds, and sponsored job placement initiatives that helped young adults find meaningful work in the tech industry. The foundation became a beacon of hope for those who had once been overlooked, just as Shaq had once been. Shaq spent much of his time visiting local schools and meeting with young students, sharing his story and encouraging them to believe in themselves. He talked about the importance of hard work, the value of integrity, and the power of collaboration. But more than anything, Shaq wanted these students to know that their circumstances didn't have to define their futures. There was always a way forward, always a chance to succeed. Shaq Tech's reputation as a company, with a heart, began to spread. It became known not just for its innovation and success in the tech industry, but for its commitment to making a difference in the world. Other companies began to take notice, and many reached out to Shaq for advice on how to implement similar changes within their own organizations. Shaq Tech had become a model for how businesses could thrive while still staying true to their values. One day, as Shaq sat at his desk reviewing the progress of Shaq Tech Cares, he received a letter. It was a handwritten note from one of the students, who had received a scholarship through the foundation. The letter thanked him for believing in her, for giving her a chance to pursue her dreams, and for showing her that success wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder, it was about helping others along the way. Shaq read the letter, his heart swelling with pride. This, he realized, was the true measure of his success. Not the billions of dollars or the accolades, but the lives he had touched. The legacy he had built wasn't just about Shaq Tech. It was about the impact that Shaq Tech had on the world. As Shaq looked out over the city skyline from his office, he knew that his journey had only just begun. The road ahead would be filled with new challenges, new opportunities, and new lives to change. But one thing was certain. Shaq Tech would continue to be a company that led with integrity, that valued people over profits, and that believed in the power of collaboration, and in the end, that would be Shaq's true legacy. In the end, Jordan Price didn't just expose the cracks in his company. He reminded us all of something bigger, that integrity, kindness, and quiet leadership still matter in a world driven by ego and profit. Sometimes it takes stepping out of the spotlight to truly see what's broken and who's worth keeping when the lights go out. As we reflect on his journey, ask yourself, if your boss went undercover tomorrow, what would they discover about you? If this story moved you or made you think, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Soulful Stories Fu for more true tales that challenge the way we see the world. And here's a question to stir the pot. Do you think CEOs should secretly test their employees like this? Or is it a betrayal of trust? Let us know below. We're reading every word.